We'll be starting with the contemporary novels. Okay. Here we shall see, first of all we'll see Peter Carey. We'll very quickly we'll go through the introduction of his novels. And Peter Carey actually he introduces the early writing of Australian novels, and he's the Booker Prize winner as well. Okay, some of his famous novels are The Fat Man in History, Bliss, Illy Wacker and Oscar and Lucinda. Okay, so these we shall discuss in detail about Peter Carey and some of his selected novels, and then in context of Peter Carey, we'll see what does Australianness means. Okay, what is the identity of this writer, and what is the identity of an Australian in terms of the global society, that we shall see through Peter Carey's novels. Then we'll see the second half part of Peter Carey's career, his later novels, and they are bit mature novels that you'll be reading, like The Tax Inspector, The Unusual Life of Tristan Smith, Jack Maggs, True History of the Kelly Gang, My Life as a Fake, Theft, a Love Story, His Illegal Self, The Chemistry of Tears, Amnesia, and A Long Way from Home are discussed. We will be discussing all these novels. Okay, then we shall see in broad explanation, theme will be discussed, background will be discussed on Peter Carey's True History of the Kelly Gang. Here we will see how the outlaws and the bandits, they form various cultures, they come from various cultures, and how this character called Ned Kelly, yeah, he becomes an Australian legend. Okay, so here you will see various cultural productions on this character Ned Kelly and his story. Okay, and we shall see the timeline of Ned Kelly's life, the basic plot line of Peter Carey's novel we'll put to discussion, and how we'll see how this character Ned Kelly stands as an eminent protagonist, as an eminent central character in Peter Carey's writing. All right. Then we'll focus here on the true history of Kelly Gang. We'll see some of the major themes of the novel. We'll see how economical inequality was pertaining in that society during colonial Australia. Okay, and how what was the condition of the working class woman in colonial Australia through the novel True History of Kelly Gang. All right, and then we will see the issues of gender, memory, and what all aspects involved to make this novel as a true history of the Kelly Gang. We are going to see. Now, when we come to the contemporary novel writing, then along with Peter Carey, there are many other writers of his time. Like, for example, there's a writer called David George Joseph Malouf. He is recognized as one of the greatest writers of Australian fiction, and he is the senior most among the Australian novelists in the Australian domain. Okay, so he has written quite a number of famous novels and novella as well. His novella An Imaginary Life was published in 1978, and it is one of the most important piece of Australian literature. And then there's another important work by him, The Great World, published in 1990. Then he wrote Remembering Babylon, published in 1993. Conversations at Cullow Creek, published in 1996. Ransom, published in 2009. Mm, and so on. So this was about David Malouf. We will move over to the next writer, Thomas Keneally. Thomas Keneally, if you remember, we have discussed it quite broadly in a couple of classes earlier, where we had talked about his best known fictional writing, Schindler's Ark, published in 1982. Schindler's Ark went on to become Steven Spielberg's movie, Schindler's List, which was released in in the halls and theaters in 1993. It's a famous Hollywood movie. Then Keneally had other fiction writings also, like The Palace at Witten, published in 1964, Three Cheers for the Paraclete, published in 1968, then Chant of Jimmy Blacksmith, published in 1972, Family Madness, published in 1985, The Tyrant's Novel, published in 2003, and The Daughters of Mars, published in 2012, Crimes of the Father, published in 2016. So I think we have done a lot in our earlier classes about Keneally. And Schindler's Ark, I have discussed quite in detail with you. So we'll move on to the next important writer, a present writer that we'll be discussing today is Peter Carey. He was born in 1943 and he started publishing his works on fiction from 1981. His first novel is Bliss, and when he published his first novel, he was 38 years of age. Okay, and few other novels followed Bliss, like Oscar and Lucinda, published in 1988. Then he wrote Jack Mags, published in 1997. True History of Kelly Gang, which we'll be doing today, published in 2000. A Long Way from Home, published in 2017. Okay, so in all these novels, you will find his perspectives are multi-tiered, multi-layered, perspectives he puts up in his novels, and he wants his reader to read his novels quite intently, quite seriously, and he tells the stories which are filled with jumbled experiences, and he chooses these experiences according to his own choice. So in his later in his life, during 21st century, when he became a matured writer, then he shifted his interest from imaginatively captured narratives to he started focusing on the history of Australia. His earlier novels were very much imaginary, okay, very much imaginative, but in a later novel was completely based on history of Australia. Okay, so this was how he matured as a writer. From completely fiction to he moved on to discuss about the history of Australia. Okay, and he brought into light many aspects of Australian history, and his general themes were very much related to very much confined to professional historians, and who broadly spoke about Australia's historical background. Okay. um, and if you read Carey, you will find that he was a very shrewd observer of different things and events taking place in Australia, and his special feature that he uses in writing is black humor. He uses a lot of black humor, and he continued to write that black humor throughout his novel until the second phase and the final phase of his writing career. And he usually deeply engages with the unfolding scenario before him. As if the different aspects, different scenes are opening before him, different secrets are opening before him. He usually suggests that in his novel. Uh, Famida, can you just mute your device? Thank you. Yeah. So I was talking about his basic intentions and his basic technique that he uses in his writing, which is usually dark comedy, dark humor he uses, and his dark he uses dark comic fables also in his novels. And the example of this, the use of dark comic fable is in his novel Bliss. Okay, where he is putting the protagonist Harry Joy as one struck dead by a severe heart attack. Okay, so this protagonist is struck dead by a severe heart attack, and then that is followed by his recovery. And then, after he recovers from his severe heart attack, he starts to live his life and he starts to think differently. Okay, so what previously looked like a happy, enjoyable episode appears to him very dark and sinister. Okay, so when he revives from his severe heart attack, he calls life to be a hell in itself. Okay, so this kind of feeling strongly gives us the later part of writing of Carey. Okay, so Carey seems to be disturbed within himself, and he's quite unsettled himself as a reader. Okay, so very frequently, if you read his novels, you will find him twisting and turning, and changing his perspectives and pursuits. Okay, and if you see his comedy, if you see his humor, it is quite dark. Okay, it is a kind of satire on certain people and certain aspect of their lives. Okay, but whatever Peter Carey uses, he is very authentic in his style. He's quite genuine in his style. Okay. Um, his all his stories, if you see different novels, they are quite properly neat. They're well neat, and he makes a smooth fabric out of his storytelling uh, talent. Okay. So, Carey, no doubt, is one of the major voices of fiction writing in contemporary Australia. And, like other writers also of that time, Carey, he makes use of certain changing circumstances that are taking place in Australia and Australian culture, and which these writers felt like addressing in their stories through novels. Okay. And, they try to present the scene from different disciplines. They take the help of sociology, history, they take the help of journalism. They show realistic depiction. Okay, in the realms of fiction writing. So there are different techniques that are used by these contemporary writers in order to write their novels, in order to make the people of Australia read the novels. um, The next comes a very important writer, J.M. Kidsey. J.M. Kidsey is John Maxwell Kidsey. He was born in 1940 and he's still alive. And he's an African Australian novelist. Okay. And he was born in Cape Town, South Africa. But he was a citizen of that country till 2006, after which he became an Australian citizen. Okay, till 2006 he was an African citizen, but then later he moved and he settled in Australia and he got the citizenship of Australia. Okay, so you can see that he has a change in his viewpoint with the change of the countries. So you might think that being an internationalist in temperament, Kizzy can be shifting to another country. It must be a personal choice that he had gone to different country, and maybe this did not affect his position as a novelist. But if you see the fact of Kizzy's life, then his interest had stayed with him. Okay, so although he had moved from Africa to Australia, but his perspectives, his position as a novelist remained same. And you must remember that he's a Nobel laureate. He had won Nobel Prize. Okay, and he is very much famous for his novels, Waiting for the Barbarians. Okay, this was published in 1980. Then he wrote Lives and Times of Michael Kay, published in 1983. He wrote Disgrace, published in 1999. Elizabeth Costello, published in 2003. Slow Man, published in 2005. The Childhood of Jesus was published in 2013. Okay, So Kizzi is undoubtedly one of the very famous uh, writers. Okay, coming from the Australian domain, though he comes originally hails from South Africa. Okay, so his career, you can call him a distinct modernist. Okay, so he was a distinct modernist. He was versatile, and he's quite open and honest towards his selfhood. Whatever he is, he projects it very honestly, very simply, very directly, and he's very much empathetic towards human beings. Okay, he understands human beings. So if you see his writings, if you see his novels, you will see that he's not bound to certain region or geographical location. Okay, but he gets inspired from diverse concerns, from diverse places, from diverse geographical locations. Okay. Mm, so this is very much typical of him as a multicultural writer, uh, that we were discussing yesterday. So his chief mode of writing is autobiographical mode, because he believes that when he's writing in an autobiographical mode, then he could derive a lot of authenticity from the imaginative personal self. Okay, and you can see that he's ruthlessly honest in his writing, and he does not deviate from the real. Okay, and whatever one feels, he exactly puts it down in his novels. uh, Something that he has gone through in his life, which he wants to project, then very directly, very unsympathetically, he projects it in his novel without any whitewashing. So he becomes one with his characters when he's conveying his feeling. Okay, and he becomes very much sensually involved with the characters, whether they are men, women, young, old, whoever they are. He completely connects himself, attaches himself with the characters. So you can see that he's imaginative also at the same time. He uses a good sense of imagination, creativity, and he as if recognizes people deeply. Okay, as if he can go beneath the skin of human figures. So in one of his works called Elizabeth Costello, you can see that he under he talks about an aging woman author. Okay, a thinker. He talks about a dreamer, and who is an able person in a in a psychological landscape. So this novel, Elizabeth Costello, it attempts to deal with the past of the woman character, reflecting her private domain of thought. Okay, and through her thoughts, you will find the cultural world of that time, where the woman goes. Okay, when she travels back in memory, then you will see what kind of cultural world has been depicted by this lady is very clearly represented in the novel Elizabeth Costello. Okay, so this kind of identification of the past is quite rare in contemporary writing. So if you see Kids' characters, they are picked from common people. Okay, they are no king, they are no queen, they are no prince, they are no princess. They are common people, they simple people. Okay, they are unknowing people who doesn't know about many things. Okay, and these people, these characters, they have the mystery of their own. Okay, and Kidzi takes this character and uses it to his own advantage. Okay, if you read his novel Life and Times of Michael K, then you will find a common person, okay, who is caught between the conditions in the middle of a country's civil war. Okay, this person, if you see Life and Times of Michael K, this person, the protagonist, is stuck amid the country's civil war. Okay, um, far away in future. So you will see that the visualization that Kids is giving is very dark. Okay, but still it is an eye opener for the world. Okay, which is yet to come, for the future. So this man is caught up in the future civil war, which is very devastating. So here Kidzi is trying to visualize the future for us, that if we have civil war of this kind, what could be the disastrous effect that he's trying to depict. Okay. So when you are reading about the future disasters, then you can make your imagine your own scene. Okay, you can become alert of the threats that is going to come upon you. Okay, so this kind of picturization through his novel he's trying to give in his writing. So uh, if you see the next novel, Childhood of Jesus, okay, this is also a dystopian novel, okay, a very disturbing kind of novel. And this novel goes parallel to the set of circumstances prevailing in the time when the work is composed. So, when he wrote this novel, Childhood of Jesus, there were disturbances in the country, and those disturbances have been parallelly depicted by him in the novel. Okay, and this helps us to solve the mystery of kids is shifting from one country and society to another. Okay, so Childhood of Jesus is written at the time when he was shifting from South Africa to Australia. And what are the things that were happening in his life are parallelly expressed in his novel Childhood of Jesus. Okay. So here actually in his novel, when he's moving from one country to another, so in his novel, he tries to depict a sense of freedom to move in and out of the shackles of defined cultural pattern. Okay, he says that I am free enough to move. I'm free enough to go. I'm free enough to explore new boundaries. Okay, uh, so I'm not bound to just any single culture. And with this feeling of happiness, of moving around the continents, he's happy and is expressing this in his novel, Childhood of Jesus. Okay, so now we will move on to the basic perspective of our present paper, present block, that is Peter Carey, and about his writing career. So if you see Peter Carey and his writing career, it's a long chronology of writings. Okay, so there are numerous, so many novels he has written, and these novels depict an exciting journey. Okay, and a journey of life, journey of a man maturing with time. And if you read the novel, The True History of the Kelly Gang, published in 2000, which we'll be discussing quite broadly here, you will then know about a short discussion we'll be doing about the next novel, The Fat Man in History. Okay, so these you will find they depict a kind of embark a kind of journey. Okay, for which you have to prepare yourself. Okay, especially when you are moving from one cultural terrain to another, what kind of preparedness do you require has been represented by Carey in his fictions. Okay, and also he uses a lot of different sort of humor and also satire at the same time. So this is one of the strongest representatives of Australian fiction writing. Okay, but historical contexts have been used time and again. Okay, in order to show you, in order to give you the picture of the social and cultural life of the time. Okay, so fiction is there, but little bit of historical help has been taken in order to show, in order to depict the social and cultural milieu of the time. Okay. If you see Peter Carey's early writing, then initially he had written The Fat Man in History. Now, Fat Man in History, actually, this is a collection of 10 stories. Okay. So, the collection of 10 stories, and one story among them has the title The Fat Man in History. So, this story is, is having a socio-political context, and, Carey is here trying to, to provoke your thoughts regarding certain social contexts, which means there is a group of fat men who live isolated from the main society. Okay, so the fat men against the revolution. They are underground organization which is against one revolution called October Revolution. Okay, so the prevailing attitude towards fat men in this Marxist utopia was that to be fat is to be oppressor. Okay, so Marxist theory believed that if you're fat means you are an oppressor, you are greedy, okay, and you are pre-revolutionary. So this is how fat people were viewed in a Marxist society. So it is impossible to say if it arose from the people or was fed to them by the propaganda of revolution. But before this revolution, most fat men were either Americans, okay, or they were some wealthy supporter of Americans. But in those years, mostly more reasonable mind, you could accept about fat men like Alexander. He was against Americans. He was against the um, he was a fat man, but he was also revolutionary. But generally, the idea is that fat men were usually disregarded because fat men were considered overall as as greedy people, as ambitious people. Okay, and which was very much disliked in the society. This is what is a representation of fat man in his collection of short stories. Next is Peter Carey's Bliss, published in 1981. This is his first novel. Okay, so here in Bliss, just like in The Fat Man, is exploring the realities, okay, of life. What are the reality? Here, the character in Bliss is Harry Joy. Okay, so he is the main narrator also. So he dies. This person, Harry Joy, he dies and he returns to his body after 9 minutes. Okay, he dies, and then again after 9 minutes he comes back to life. And this experience actually, uh, show is an eye opener for Joy. Okay, because uh, after his death for 9 minutes, he sees so many things in the modern world. And, here, overall, Bliss as a novel, it engages with the notion of hell and heaven. Okay, so when you speak about heaven and hell, means you're speaking about good and evil. Okay, without being religious or even without invoking religious call, you can, conceptualize hell and heaven. So hell in this novel, Bliss, is a kind of cry that you have seen in Dante's Inferno, very much close. Okay. Um, so Bliss here is set in the modern world where Harry Joy, the central character's state of being dead lasts for 9 minutes, and in this period, he when he's outside his body, how does it feel? Okay, that is what is shown throughout in the novel. The next novel is Illy Wacker by Carey, and this was published in 1985. Okay, so with Illy Wacker, um, is a kind of comic invention, and here the character is Herbert Badgery. Herbert Badgery is the narrator. Okay, and he declares like this in the opening novel. He says that my name is Herbert Badgery. I am 139 years old and something of a celebrity. Okay, so like this he introduces himself in the introductory part of the novel. So the title Illy Wacker actually means is an uncommon word, okay, which means small time confident trickster. Okay, so Illywacker is a rarely used term. It means small time confidence trickster. Okay, he's a trickster. So Herbert Badgery, um, he's a liar. Okay, and in the novel Illy Wacker, he says lying is my main subject, my specialty, my skill. Okay, so Badgery here admits that he's a typical liar. So you can see that he's lying also, and at the same time he's entertaining the readers. The readers remain completely captivated by whatever this badger is saying. Okay, and he advises his readers not to try to pull apart the strands of lies and truth, but to relax and enjoy the show. So badger is saying to his readers, he's a narrator, and he's saying to his readers that do not try to take out the truth with the lies. Just enjoy whatever I'm saying, that's all. So it's quite humorous to read the novel, and the narrative here follows the fortunes of this character Herbert, and the story begins in the year 1919, when the 33-year-old Herbert lands his aeroplane in a field close to the property of a person called Jack McGrath. Okay, and this fellow Jack McGrath is a bullock herder. Okay, he herds bullock. So Herbert becomes friends with Jack, and he requests Jack to invest in the construction of an aeroplane factory. Herbert says, I want to make an aeroplane factory, and he's requesting Jack to invest something for the factory. So Herbert and Jack, uh, Jack has one teenage daughter called Phoebe. Okay, and Herbert is attracted to Phoebe. So they get married, and then they have two children, Sonia and Charles. So Phoebe, prior to her marriage to Herbert, was involved in a lesbian relationship with a teacher called Annette Davidson. Okay, Annette Davidson. So here you will see Herbert Badgery is in a crisscross condition with his fortune and misfortune. So his individual states of mind also determine happenings in their lives. Now, Jack, this man, where in whose land Herbert's aeroplane lands, Jack commits suicide. Okay, following a violent argument between Herbert and some other investors. Okay, so Herbert and other investors also join hand, and they have a lot of argument with Jack. So with this heavy argument, Jack commits suicide. So the narrative here presents beautiful moments shared by Herbert and Phoebe. Okay, as a couple, they are happy. And while he's teaching her to fly the plane, you can see some happy moments that they're enjoying. But after learning to fly Herbert's aeroplane, Phoebe steals it. Okay, leaves her husband and children, and she flies to live with her lesbian companion Annette. Okay, so now Herbert is very disturbed. Where has this lady gone? He's quite jilted. Okay. So he briefly becomes the lover of Jack's widow. Now he sees that when his wife has run away, so he becomes the lover of Jack's widow. Her name is Molly, means his own mother-in-law. He tries to be in love with his own mother-in-law. Okay. So accompanied with his two children, Herbert tries to have a living because wife has gone with the aeroplane. So very often he tries to live as a confidence trickster. At this time he meets a person called Lee Goldstein. Now Lee Goldstein is a former medical student. Now she has become a dancer who is married to one communist agitator, Izzy Kalsky. So she and Herbert now become lovers. Okay, but Lee turns to care for Izzy, her former husband. Okay. Now her former husband's both legs are amputated, means they're cut off in an accident, and Lee when goes back to her husband in order to take care of him, and she leaves Herbert. Okay. Okay. So now this lady, she also goes back to her husband when her husband's leg is amputated. So she goes back. Now Herbert has a daughter. Okay, he has children. He has a daughter also. So now Herbert's daughter Sonia dies. Okay, and Herbert is sent to prison because he assaults one Chinese man. Okay, he says that this man was his childhood mentor, and he assaults this Chinese man. His name is Goon Se Ying. Okay, whose finger is torn off. In prison, now Herbert goes to prison. So in the prison, he is presented with the preserved finger in a jar. Whose finger? This Chinese man's finger. And finds that looking into the jar, he presents the viewer with curious visions. He sees some different visions. Now the finger is preserved in a chemical called formaldehyde. Okay, so it is one of the surreal elements in the novel. Um, okay, and then he sees the condition of the finger, and he shows the reader also how does the finger look like. Then Herbert's son, there's a son also, Charles. He grows up and he becomes a dealer in animals. Now Charles meets a girl called Emma Underhill, and Charles falls in love with Emma, and he gets married with Emma. So despite the warnings that he gets from her father about her fragile mental state, she has got a very fragile mental state, uh, where Emma's father is time and again warning Charles, but doesn't pay heed to the warnings, and he marries her. Okay. Okay, now Charles, with time, he builds a successful business selling animal farm, and he moves into larger and larger premises because he gradually becomes more and more successful. Okay, now the story goes this way, that there's a world war. Okay, two world war follow each other, and here Charles witnesses these two wars, and you know now what happens is quite traumatized with whatever is happening by the war. Um, and then Emma's mental state also collapses at this time. She goes to live in a cage. Okay, she believes that her house is a cage, so she goes to live in a cage. So uh, actually, this lady living in a cage, going and preferring to live in a cage, is actually metaphorical. Okay. It actually shows that we purposefully try to curb our freedom, and we prefer to live in our own cages. Actually, this cage is metaphorical. Okay. Now, Herbert, later in the novel, you see Herbert is freed from the prison, and then Emma comes into the possession of a jar which contains the finger of that Chinese man. Okay. And looking at the finger, she feels that there is a reptile in the bottle. Okay. She feels that it is not a finger but a reptile in the bottle. And she says that this reptile, actually she is not in a normal state of mind, so she claims that this reptile is the half brother of her son Hisao. Okay, so Charles is driven to the wall in this maniac atmosphere, and he shoots Emma. Okay, and turns the gun to himself. He wants to now kill himself. So Charles, pet is also an interesting part in the novel. He has a pet, and because he is very much prone to smuggle rare animals. Charles, brings in one pet for himself. Now, this character Hisao, he desires to become an architect, but he falls in line with the family's expectation to assist in the animal trade business. So the author here, Carey, he seems to draw a thread from social fabric of the Australian nation through his depiction of the life of Hisao. Hisao actually is the third generation. He is the child of um, who is the second character of Charles. Okay, see Herbert, second generation Charles, third generation Esau. Okay, so he is showing, actually the author here, he is showing the three generations of people living in Australia. Okay, so Esau's father being Charles is the son of Herbert. So Charles also compromises on his principles because his business is backed by Americans. Okay, Americans who illegally export animals. Okay, so Hisao accidentally kills a rare bird he's smuggling, whereupon he sells much of his share in the business to Japanese investors. So, for Japanese investors, he was working, he was exporting illegally rare animals. So, while exporting rare animals, by mistake, he kills one animals. So, he has to give up a lot of money in order to compensate the damage. Okay, and the investors are Japanese. So here you can see that Australian Australian continent is full of different species, various and diverse species of animals. Okay, and these animals are by westerners particularly, they are exported, they are smuggled out. Okay, so this story also depicts the illicit smuggling of animals by the by the natives of that place. Now the next novel in line is Oscar and Lucinda. This was published in 1988. Okay. Okay, now we'll discuss Carey's next novel. Then we will go over to his later novels. Mm, yeah. So his next novel, as I told you, is Oscar and Lucinda, published in 1988. Okay. Now, both, if you see Illy Wacker and Oscar and Lucinda, they show Carey's amusement with what makes Australia what it is. Okay. What is Australia? Okay, according to the perception of Carey, if you want to see, then these two novels are the best examples. Okay, in both novels, you will see that the narrative spans the lives of successive generations. First generation are the settlers in Ilevaker, and there are three generations following one after another. Okay, and if you see Oscar and Lucinda, you will see four generation. So the narrator here speaks about his grandfather Oscar. Okay. And with regard to some social commentary, he attempts to understand and make the readers understand where the story all began and how the story involved, and what is a responsible writer who shouldn't fail to express the exactness of the changing times. So along with the fiction, you can say a bit of history and a bit of belief in the continuity of the past till the present uh, is projected by Carey. So the protagonist, you can see, is Oscar and Lucinda, and Oscar and Lucinda, you can see their great personalities in the novel. Okay, so here actually in the starting, if you read the novel, during the starting you will see that in the initial lines you will find Oscar's life in England, okay, and Lucinda's life in Australia. So both of them are living in two different lands. Oscar is living in England and Lucinda is living in Australia. Oscar was training in England for a vocation in church. So Oscar was actually training in England for a vocation in church, and in on 22nd April 1863, Oscar decided on God's that there is some God's calling. Okay. And when he tossed up the coin to show head, he decided that he should serve God in New South Wales. So he tossed a coin that I'm getting a calling, but from which place? So in one side he keeps some other country, and in one side he keeps New South Wales. And when the coin turns head, he decides that he should go and serve God in New South Wales in Australia. Okay. Now Lucinda arrives in Sydney with a huge bank draft. Her inheritance she has got from selling farmland at a place called Mitchell Creek. Okay, and Lucinda is a strong young woman. She has inherited much of her strength and progressive outlook from her late mother, Elizabeth. Okay, so Elizabeth was a widow. Even when she and her husband Abel were settling in, Abel had died naturally, and Abel had left with Elizabeth a strong feeling to return to London. Okay, actually, they are English people, but they have settled here in Australia. But then again, the stronger part of Elizabeth's personality prevailed. Okay, and she said that no, we are not going to England, but we are going to stay here in Australia. So Elizabeth did not like the ways of those European people, and she revolted also against feminist sensibility. She was not a feminist at all, and she had told her daughter that that European people had their women walk after them with their heads bowed like prisoners of war. So Elizabeth filled in the mind of her daughter Lucinda that these European people, they dominate women a lot, and they ask women to walk with their heads down. Okay, just like prisoners of war. So but she decided to stay in Australia along with her daughter Lucinda. Okay, but she wanted to settle and she wanted to have her own farmland and all, but it did not it did not come to reality, and Elizabeth dies. Okay, Elizabeth also has a premature death. So this means that Lucinda is the only heiress to such a huge property. So now she's literally carrying all her wealth with her, and she arrives Sydney. Okay, the Society of Sydney with lot of money. So uh, now she here in Sydney she buys one industry. Okay, and industry of glass works, and we see Lucinda working very resourcefully. In that glass factory, she's the owner here, and this hard working capacity she has undoubtedly inherited from her mother, and she works here. Okay, and Lucinda, she purchases all these glass works by herself, and she decides that she should work more and more hard. Okay, and Lucinda has this passion that transparent thing like glass is only a lens through which we see that glass is a metaphor for the enterprising settler. Okay, delivering this idea, uh, she believes that glass is actually metaphorical, and carry purposefully push this glass is metaphorical of the enterprising settlers, the business class settlers. Okay, so the plot develops, and the author pays a great deal of attention to this material glass. A lot of explanation is given about the glass. Okay, and Oscar now decides also to come to this part, and both Oscar and Lucinda presently, although they are in the separate worlds, but they are obsessed, both of them are obsessed with gambling and playing cards. Okay, so apart from gambling being a part of the cultural history of Australia, card game also has symbolic overtone in the novel. Okay, so this cliched expression from day to day life, and they're playing cards, um, happens to be the idea actually, which is very much Australian. Okay, so not only Lucinda is fascinated to play cards, but it is the In Australia, they play a lot of cards and they do a lot of gambling. So Lucinda, has been dealt a life she did not ask for. She had a very secure life, then father went away, then mother had a premature death. Okay, and she got so much of money to inherit. Okay, and she was so young because she was just 17 when her mother passed away. Okay, now she's a rich young woman, all alone in this world, and now Lucinda also takes to playing card. Okay, now Oscar and Lucinda, they come from two different worlds. So while Oscar, you will find he, you know. Um, he belonged to the one side of the society. Uh, Lucinda belongs to the different part of the society. So Lucinda then leaves Sydney because she's dejected. Okay, and she doesn't like the place, and she then goes to London. From this place, she goes back to London, and to their ancestral place where mother did not like to go. Now she is quite certain that in London she would find someone whom she could marry. Okay, and whom she could give away her wealth to take care of. So after a disappointing experience in London, on the advice of a friend, okay, she again gets back to Sydney. So this is where she meets Oscar. Okay. So though Oscar is an Anglican minister, he justifies his interest in gambling. Although he's a minister, okay, he's a church person, but he also shows his interest in gambling uh, because of the argument that faith itself is a gamble. He says that faith itself is a gamble, so I too believe in gambling. Okay. So Lucinda is also a gambler. She loves playing card, and you find Oscar the same. Okay, so you find that this kind of symbolism of cards and gambling is quite symbolic. It's quite effective through the author's portrayal uh, of the settler colonies in Australia. Okay, so gambling is actually representative of Australian culture and how settler culture had their own ways that is represented here. Okay, so here the narratives moves on to describe Oscar as an obsessive gambler. Okay, becomes obsessive gambler, and Lucinda becomes a compulsive gambler. All right. So Lucinda's social circle in Sydney is only engaged in playing cards. She's very rich and lonely. Okay, and she's quite quickly accepted, by the invitation by the people. Okay, so here you can see that Carey's narrative states that Lucinda took to gambling very quickly. Okay, and she played cards. Oscar, on the other hand, selected by the Christian Missionary Society to serve in Australia, he managed to pay for his passage on the Leviathan only through the money he has made at the races. Whatever gamble he has gambled, okay, he uses that money. So he believes that God provides the money he needs. Okay, through this gambling. So through gambling, it is God who gives him money. Okay, and he says that faith itself is a gamble, and that being the case, chasing one's fortune through gambling is all right. So he says that when life itself is a gamble, what's the point? Not gambling. Okay, so one should gamble because life is itself is a kind of a game of gambling. So this is a big comment on gambling in Australian culture. Okay, so actually Australians love to gamble. Okay, and they're committed to that luck is a central idea. Okay, of their national life. So for them, they believe a great in luck. So it suits the people living in climate of extremes. They're isolated islands in the continent. Okay, the geographical location of Australian loneliness of the settler, gives them scope, gives them encouragement to gamble. Okay, maybe if they could get lucky to get some money. Okay, so if you see that if Lucida is a settler, then she is lonely and rich. So gambling could fill that gap, that void in her life. And if you see Oscar, and Lucinda both, then this idea of enterprise from the point of sailing to antipodes with, Oscar choosing to sail to Australia and also to converse with Lucinda sailing. Okay. So with this, we finish that first part of Carrie's career. We'll now move on to the later novels. Just hold on. Okay, so now we move on to the next part of Carrie's novel, to the later part. Here also you see there is a big list of his novels. You have the tax inspector, then the unusual life of Tristan Smith, then you have Jack Maggs, then you have the true story of Kelly Gang, then my life as a fake, theft, a love story, his illegal self, the chemistry of tears, amnesia, a long way from home. So these are the list of the novels by Carey, which he wrote towards the later part of his life. Learners, just give me 2 minutes break. I'll get back to you in 2 minutes. I need a short break. Okay, so now we'll be dealing with the later novels of Peter Carey. The first novel, as I said, is The Tax Inspector. Now, Tax Inspector engages with the theme of enterprise. Okay, so Tax Inspector was published in 1991. Okay, and it talks about the family, who are dependent on an automobile business. Okay, so the sale, they talk about the sale of cars. Okay, and the whole story revolves around these characters of this family. Next is Jack Max. This was published in 1997. Okay, and Jack Max has the theme of national identity. Uh, through the mode that you find in his novel Tristan's Myth. Okay, so here in Jack Max, he returns to early settlement in Australia. Okay, especially the notion of Australia as a penal colony in Jack Max. So, like Oscar and Lucinda, here the novel also connects, Jack Max also connects with London and the antipodes. Okay, so while in Oscar and Lucinda, you find the connection had to do with the fortune seeking in Australia, Jack Max, on the other hand, actually is the protagonist. Okay, uh, and he has a convict past. Okay, and he for that reason he has been transported to Australia. So this is a convict narrative that you find written by Carey. Next is the true history of Kelly Gang, published in 2000. So, through the persona of this bush ranger of Australian history, the protagonist here is Ned Kelly in the novel The True History of the Kelly Gang. Okay, Ned Kelly is the protagonist, and the story here is about the fierce and proud Kelly Gang. Okay, so here, this is a most unusual story, unusual circumstance also, because for an outlaw to be heroic figure in the history of a nation is very important. That is what is portrayed here. So Ned Kelly is a rebel hero, you can say. Okay, so so in the beginning of the novel, you find that the discussion on all the novels of Peter Carey, you can see that they rather peep into each of these texts. Okay, so here one text is a peep into the next text of Carey. So there is interconnectedness in the plot. Okay, and the style here is also quite engaging, but more importantly, here Australia as a domain of infinite variety, of spirit, okay, of evolution, of celebration has been represented here in the novel. Okay, so here you can see that like many other novels, so this novel also is the later novel, which has got a little bit of a little bit more of the historicity of Australia. Now the next novel is My Life as a Fake. This was published in 2003. Okay, now My Life as a Fake is all about identity. Okay, and identity here is the eminent issue to be put under discussion, and you can see that Australian novel overall, uh, they keep coming in intervals in the contemporary time, which depicts a lot about identity. So My Life as a Fake actually talks about uh, in a society where mother has actually committed suicide. Okay, and she's set on a trial by a family friend and a poet called John Slater. Okay, who is to visit Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. So, with the hope that this journey would help clarify the circumstances of her mother's suicide. So, there is a gloom in the whole narrative. Sarah here discovers Christopher Chubb, a middle-aged Australian with sore, crusted legs, reading a rare copy of Rilke. Okay, so here the story involves revolves around the murder of the uh, mother of the protagonist. The next novel is Theft. It is a love story published in 2006. Okay, so here as you can see, the story is about a theft, okay, and it is connected to a love story. So it is the story of a person called Michael Boone, okay, whose career is going great. Okay, so as the novel opens, Butcher is his name is Michael Butcher Boone. So Butcher is fresh out of jail for robbing his ex-wife, okay, of his own paintings, paintings that become hers when the marriage ended. Means he has painted. After the marriage ended, she took away all the paintings. So he looted all the uh, uh, rooted, he robbed his ex-wife who had her paintings. Okay, so Butcher also had the added weight of managing his own brother Hugh, who is really heavy. He weighs 220 pounds, so he has the burden of taking care of his brother as well. Okay, so Butcher, along with Hugh and with lot of debt, is in a very bad place in his life until Marlene arrives to the scene. Okay, so Marlene here, uh, you know, is a moral character, and she is the hereditary right to authentic paintings. Okay, so in this case, those of Oliver's dead father, Jack's. Um, she has come here. So somehow Butcher and you both, they have a farmer neighborer who has recently acquired a lot of money. So Marlene here, as the neighborer, being there to put a validating stamp, immediately sends, uh, sends the wealth, and who herself is a very rich heir. The next novel is his Illegal Cell, published in 2008. This novel is set in 1972. The main character here is She Selkirk. She Selkirk is brought up in New York by his grandmother. He longs to meet his biological mother. So, not being with either of his parents is damaging to his own self. So it so happens in the story that on a visit to the city from his isolated home on Kenusa Lake in New York, Shay meets a woman who he believes is his mother. Okay, the woman name is Dial. She attempts to arrange a meeting between Shay and his mother, but this is cancelled after Shay's mother is killed while attempting to plant a bomb. Okay, Dial then takes the boy away from New York, first to Seattle, where they briefly meet Shay's father, and then to Queensland in Australia. So Dial and Shay eventually settle into a hippie community while still attempting to evade the authorities. Next novel is The Chemistry of Tears by Carey. This was published in 2012. Then the next comes Amnesia, published in 2014. Okay, and A Long Way from Home, 2017. Okay, now moving on, we'll see a bit of contemporary novel with regard to women novelists and for children and young adults. Okay, and we'll see what are the recent trends in Australian writing. And with this, we are going to end today's class. Now, I shall discuss with you some women novelists. Now, women novelists from 1980s and onwards, you will see they are known as contemporary writers. Okay, so the first among this contemporary writer is Anna Maria Bunn. She is the first woman novelist to have published in Australia. Okay, and she has written the novels like The Guardian, A Tale Told by an Australian. Okay, but she did not use her name to publish it. It was published anonymously. Okay, and then this was a very famous and path-breaking novel. This was followed by um, a novel called A Bright and Fiery Troop, Australian women writers of the 19th century. Okay, then the next writer is Henry Handel Richardson. She was born in 1870, died in 1946. She used the pseudonym of Ethel Florence Lindsay Robertson. Okay, and from 1883 to 1887, Richardson was a pupil of Presbyterian Ladies College in Melbourne. Okay, so she had written a trilogy, mm, like The Fortunes of Richard Mahoney. Okay, it talks about immigrants' life and work in the gold fields. Okay, then the next is Ruth Park, the next female writer, Ruth Park. Okay, now she was a poor person born in a poor family in New Zealand. Okay, in 1917. At that time, she had no access to books for the first 10 years, but later she acquired the ability to write and she won too many prizes for short story. And she started it from the age of 11. Okay, her famous novel is The Harp in the South, published in 1948. Then Sydney-born novelist Christina Steed, born in 1902, died in 1983. She is the author of a number of celebrated novels, including The Man Who Loved Children, published in 1940, Cotter's England, published in 1967. Okay, so her novels and letters uh, is a huge criticism on the culture where women are encouraged to be obedient. Okay, and they are supposed to conform uh, to the attitudes of men. Okay, then comes next novelist Eleanor Dark, born in 1901 and died in 1985. Her famous work is The Timeless Land, then The Little Company. Then next writer is Jean Devaney, born in 1894, died in 1962. Okay, now she got a fellowship for Commonwealth Literary Fund to support her writing, and she published this novel Bird of Paradise in 1945. Next is Mary Fullerton. Okay, she's also known as Mary Eliza, born in 1868 and died in 1946. Okay, so her famous works are Bark House Days. It is a memoir which looks nostalgically back to her childhood days. Okay, so in 1922, Mary left for England, where she lived for the rest of her life in England. Okay, so then she wrote in her later life, she wrote her novels called The People of the Timber Belt, published in 1925. Then A Juno of the Bush, published in 1930. The Australian Bush, published in 1928. Next female writer is Jean Campbell, born in 1901 and died in 1984. Her famous work is Greek Key Patterns. Now moving on to children and young adult literature. Okay, so Australia you can see is a domain of diverse literature, which also includes children books for children and young adults. Okay, and this has developed because of the multicultural representation in the country. Okay, and if you take into consideration this introduction of the book called Teaching Children's Literature, then you will see that children's literature is very much appreciated from diverse points of view, mainly in the domain of Australia, and they may actually be wider in range than the approaches the readers adopt towards texts, strongly rooted in a traditional and adult canon. Okay, so this book published by Modern Language Association in 1992, the book called Teaching Children's Literature, it contains essays by scholars who practice new historicism, structuralism, feminism, psychology, myth, okay, and reader response criticism. So they have written on this children literature basing on their various ideas on different theories. Okay, now this lady called Charlotte Barton, she's the mother of Louisa Atkinson. Louisa Atkinson is also a very famous writer, novelist. Her mother, Charlotte Barton, she published the first children's book in Australia in 1841. Okay, and the name of the book is A Mother's Offering to Her Children. Now, this had a very didactic tone, and it had a popular form of dialogue exchanges, and it is a collection of facts and stories which a mother relates to her four children. Okay, so other famous books of this time include William Howitt's book called A Boy's Adventures in the Wilds of Australia, or Herbert's Notebook, published in 1854, Richard Rose, The Boy in the Bush, published in 1869, Seven Little Australians, published in 1894. Okay, and so on. Now we'll discuss some important work of children's literature. Okay, so you know there many different organizations here, they have worked a lot to promote children's literature, so that children could have their own perspective with regard to literature. So mainly an association called the Children's Book Council of Australia, CBSA. Actually, it is a non-profit organization. Okay, and this was established in 1945 in New South Wales, and they established this in order to promote literature for young Australians. Okay, and this CBSA presents annual awards also to outstanding books for children's literature. So the Children's Book Council of Australia has presented annual, awards who are there in the literary merit since 1946. Okay, and the award-winning people, they are shortlisted, and they inspire others to write, to read, and uh, many children's literature have come in the form of films as well, like Silver Brumby. It's a series. Okay, it's a collection written by Eileen Mitchell. So this has been you know uh, converted as a film as well. Then another other important work which have come to limelight and which have collected lots of awards are Colin Thiel's Storm Boy, published in 1964. It is about a boy and his relationship with his father. Okay, and his father is an outcast original aboriginal man called Fingerbone. So how this outcast aboriginal man treats his child, this is what is involved in the story Storm Boy, which got a lot of critical acclaim. Okay, then there's another organization, the Australian Children's Laureate. Okay, now this is a noble initiative developed by Australian Children Literature Alliance. So again, this is a non-profit organization found very recently in 2008. Okay, so this organization plays a role in promoting children's literature. Okay, and this particular organization has given a good acclaim to much loved children authors like Alison Lester and Buri Monty Pryor. So with the help of this Australian Children's Laureate, these authors, namely Alison Lester and Buri Monty Pryor, have come to the limelight. Now, about young adult literature, in the last 2 decades, you will find last 20 years, um, this whole book market in Australia is experiences a rise in books written by Australians for young adult. Young adult readership is now increasing in Australian domain. So in recent years, Australian authors are quite inclined to prioritize place. Okay, they have frequent reference to bush. Okay, the ruggedness of the Australian landscape is also depicted. Okay, this rugged landscape is quite often sensationalized in many novels. Stories are set in such locales in order to give young minds some sense of attachment with their landscapes. Okay, so these landscape usually in young adult literature they create particular plot. Okay, and uh, people also have their typical role in this setting, in this plot. Okay, so place here often acts as a metaphor and it portrays the mental landscape. Okay, for young children literature. Another very significant issue that you will find in Australian uh, young adult literature is that they are trying to give a specific meaning to the landscape, which may be metaphorically depicting their own mental landscape. Okay, so gradually with this substantial part of writing you will see a lot of encouragements have been done in children and young adult fiction writing. Okay, and gradually you will see that they are more realistic in their themes, uh, and you will see that in the Australian domain particularly that censorship is not that strictly followed, and books that appear in the market and they reach the adolescents and young adults, they explore various themes which were earlier considered as taboos. Now you will see see these young adult books, they're freely talking about sex, drugs, alcohol, gambling, racism, prejudice, poverty, abuse, violence, and many such things in order to make the people aware, make these young minds aware of the abuses that they might be threatened with in the contemporary society. Okay, and if you see most famous Australian young adult literature in 21st century is by John Marsden. Okay, so this book has been sold more than any book in Australian literature. John Marsden. Okay, so just like you will find J.K. Rowling is very famous worldwide. Okay, similarly, John Marsden is very famous in the Australian domain. Okay, so John just like J.K. Rowling, John Marsden also paints one scene. Okay, which is rooted to the immediate future and which measures the bravery, resourcefulness of the Australian people. Okay, who are chasing for their dreams. So these books are the major examples of stories that imaginatively fulfill the wish of adolescents for liberty and power. Okay, in postmodern society, where the adolescents are very much running after power and recognition, these books are quite satisfactory for the young mass to read. Okay, so it is very heartening to note that many members of adult community they are also reading young adult literature of Marsden's adventure fiction. Okay, because it has got a typical stylistic angle. Okay, and a very much clear depiction of modern fiction is found here in the novels of Marsden. And Marsden's most popular series of 7 novels are there. They're very famous, starting with the novel called Tomorrow, then When the War Began, then The Other Side of Dawn, and so on. So this is very famous work by Marsden, which not only young adults are reading, but uh, adolescents are reading, but adults are also reading. Now, we have completely come to a point where we have already covered a greater part of the history and development of Australian novel. quite detailedly for this past 7 8 days. I've been discussing about Australian novels, and we have got quite engaged with the mm, different varieties of Australian novelists. Okay, now we have the idea of the contemporary scene, also ongoing contemporary scene in the Australian novel. Okay, what are the contemporary developments in the fiction, that also already we have thrown the light. Okay, now we will be seeing what kind of journey do these scholars and writers intend to take on in order to be thematically, stylistically apt in their writing. What all things are involved, that we shall see. Now if you see, in early 1960s, there's a man called Bartlett. Now he had talk of winds of change in the Australian novel. Okay, so winds of change mean changes are coming. So ever since, these winds have continued to blow continuously, and the Australian fictional landscape has been in a constant change, in a constant flux. So it just goes to prove that there is much happening in this field of creativity, and this promise of significant activity is enough to show us the attention of the readers. Okay, so if early novelists and their considerable work had had taken into waves in the Australian domain. It has, because Australia, they have represented it very skillfully, of the distinctive literary culture that Australia had. Then these are the couple of Nobel prizes and Booker prizes have also come. They have brought a lot of global recognition in the Australian domain of literary writings. So in the present, in the contemporary world of Australian fiction, you can see that there is a constant progress. They are always moving, they are evolving, they are getting better and better and more substantial in their production of literary writings. Okay, so when you find older popular themes where democracy, they spoke a lot about egalitarianism, they spoke a lot about nationalism, national identity, then they talked about aboriginal identities, they spoke about migration, they talk about bush literature, okay, they spoke about beauty and terror. Okay, then you can see that it continues to be addressed new events, new happenings in recent fictional writings. Okay, so but by the treatment of these traditional themes is different, and this contemporariness is quite different. Okay, so we'll see the themes and trends in the Australian English novel that is continuously evolving and continuously making us updated with the contemporary issues going on in the Australian domain. So, if you see, if you think that earlier Aboriginal people were writing, contemporary writing is not there, then you are wrong. Okay, there are lots of contemporary writing coming on from Aboriginal side as well. Okay, so famous writers are Alexis Wright. Okay, then Anita Hees. There are many writers who are continuously writing. Okay, about the contemporary aboriginal issues. Okay, like Alexis Wright has written Carpentaria 2006. Okay, now this also had a lot of aboriginal people belonging to the Gulf of Carpentaria, and what kind of life they are living, and what are the problems has been properly uh, you know portrayed in the novel Carpentaria. Okay, and you can see that Alexis Wright, who has written Carpentaria in 2006, and in 2014 she has written the Swan book. So all these writings, they talk about a lot of Aboriginal identities in terms with the in terms of their immediate surrounding, the immediate location. Okay, and they're talking about how nature is exploited, just like this Aboriginal tribes. Nature is in just juxtaposition with the tribal identity, which is in threat. how exploitation of nature continuously goes on. This is very sensitively displayed by Alexis Wright in her novels. If you see women writers of the contemporary time, then you can see that women are also writing constantly. Okay. And there are awards also which are specifically for women, like Stella Prize, Nita B. Gibble, Dottie Literary Award. These are meant to encourage women writers. Okay. And women are also writing. Miles Franklin Award is also there, where women are encouraged to write and women are encouraged to express their perspectives through fiction writing. Now, in the recent times, if you see these, Australian contemporary writers, they're dealing with myriad of issues and topics and themes, like they're talking about environmental changes and global warming issues. They are talking about their contemporary society and the politics that is involved in the contemporary society. They talk about the contemporary aboriginal issues. So, they are very expressive in their ideas. Okay. Through different genres they're expressing themselves. So if you see the contemporary Australian novel, it has shown great promise, okay, about the fictional scenes. So writers, you will find they're extraordinary. They've got narrational gifts, okay, and they're bringing out novels that are very bold, and even they are very deep and aesthetically sophisticated. They are in their writing, and these writers continue to show that they are versatile in their themes. And in the contemporary times, Australian writing is no way behind other countries and places. So, despite their multicultural diversity, they are the melting pot of different cultures, but still they have their own perspective, they have their own stand, they have their own identity to express in their own way their thoughts, their expressions, their creative knacks. So with this, we totally come to the an end with all the uh, parts that we dealt with throughout our writing, throughout our teaching, and we had very specified with novel writing, and we see that for them novel, when they're writing novel, they are mixing, to a large extent they're mixing non-fiction with fiction, and they're trying to blur the boundary of what we call exact canons of fiction writing and exact canons of non-fiction writing. They're blurring this boundary, and uh, they are representing their own nation as it is. Okay. They're giving quite vivid picture of their nation. They are satirical as well about the things that happened and that is happening in their nation. Okay. And they are rejoicing with their idea of nationalism as well. They come from different genres, from different perspectives, like women, children, adults, and so on. Okay. And through all these, they are trying to express that they also form a major part um, of English literature that could be added to the mainstream literature in the global space. So this is how they carry their substance with them, and in future also they would prove themselves to be one of the greatest contributors of Australian writings in English. So, dear learners, with this, I come to an end with uh, all the aspects of novel as a genre, which is very much plentifully done, substantially done in the domain of Australia. So, with this, I end my class. I log out, and I hope I have been, clear. I have expressed myself with as much clarity as possible, and I hope you understood, you enjoyed my class. So I sign off. Have good time. Good evening.